On September 15, 1940, the Battle of Britain reached its climax, marking a crucial day in the history of World War II. This was a turning point not just in the air war between Britain and Nazi Germany, but in the entire war. The battle was fought in the skies over the United Kingdom and the English Channel, and its outcome would determine whether or not Hitler's planned invasion of Britain, called Operation Sea Lion, could succeed. 1. Prelude to the battle, the fall of France. The story of the Battle of Britain cannot be told without understanding the context in which it unfolded. By June 1940, Nazi Germany had swiftly conquered France, leaving Britain as the last major European power standing against Hitler. With the English Channel now acting as Britain's only geographical defense, Germany turned its attention to air superiority. Hitler believed that by neutralizing the Royal Air Force, RAF, he could pave the way for a successful invasion. The stage was set for a battle that would decide Britain's future. 2. Technological innovation, radar and aircraft. One of the defining features of the Battle of Britain was the technological advancements that both sides employed. On the British side, the development and deployment of radar revolutionized their defensive strategy. This new technology allowed the RAF to detect incoming German planes well before they crossed into British airspace, giving them critical time to prepare. Alongside radar, British fighter planes like the Supermarine Spitfire and the Hawker Hurricane became iconic symbols of the country's defense. These aircraft were nimble and powerful, perfectly suited to counter the Luftwaffe's assaults. On the German side, the Luftwaffe relied on its formidable fleet of Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters and Heinkel E-111 bombers. These aircraft were designed for speed and firepower, but Germany lacked the technological advantage of radar, which left them vulnerable to Britain's early warning systems. 3. Strategic bombing, Germany's shifting tactics. At the start of the battle, Germany's strategy was focused on crippling the RAF by targeting airfields, radar stations, and aircraft factories. Their goal was simple: achieve air superiority over the British skies. However, in response to a surprise bombing raid on Berlin by the RAF, Hitler altered his strategy. Furious at the attack, he ordered the Luftwaffe to shift its focus to bombing major British cities in what became known as the Blitz. This shift was a critical mistake. Although the bombing caused widespread devastation and loss of life in cities like London and Coventry, it allowed the RAF to rebuild its airfields and repair aircraft, ultimately giving Britain a chance to recover. 4. The role of the few, RAF fighter pilots. The battle's outcome relied heavily on the skill, bravery, and determination of the RAF fighter pilots, who were famously referred to as the few. Outnumbered by the Luftwaffe, these pilots fought tirelessly, taking to the skies day after day to defend their homeland. Their role was crucial in wearing down the German Air Force and preventing them from gaining the upper hand. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill immortalized their courage in his famous speech, declaring, "Never in a field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." 5. Turning point, September 15, 1940. September 15, 1940, became known as Battle of Britain Day for a reason. On this day, the Luftwaffe launched one of its most massive attacks, sending wave after wave of bombers and fighter escorts to strike at Britain's heart. The Germans believed that this assault would finally break the RAF's resistance, but the RAF responded with an overwhelming defense. British fighters scrambled in large numbers, engaging the enemy in a series of fierce dogfights. By the end of the day, the Luftwaffe had lost a significant number of planes, while British losses were far lower. This day marked the turning point of the battle. Hitler, realizing that the RAF could not be defeated quickly, began to doubt the viability of his invasion plans. 6. Long-term implications: the battle's legacy. The Battle of Britain not only halted Nazi expansion in Western Europe, but also set the stage for a shift in the tide of World War II. It proved that Hitler could be resisted, and it demonstrated the critical role of air power in modern warfare. For Britain, the victory was not just strategic but also symbolic. It strengthened national morale and reinforced the determination to fight on, even in the face of immense adversity. The legacy of this battle continues to be remembered, both as a testament to British resilience and as a pivotal moment in the history of air combat. On September 15, 1940, the RAF's defense of the skies made history, securing a momentous victory that changed the course of the war and ensured that Britain would continue to stand strong against Nazi aggression. On September 15, 1950, an event occurred that would dramatically alter the course of the Korean War: the U.S. Marines' amphibious landing at Inchon. To understand the significance of this operation, it's essential to grasp the strategic context of the war leading up to that point. The Korean War had erupted in June 1950 when North Korean forces, backed by Soviet support, launched a surprise invasion across the 38th parallel into South Korea. In the initial months of the conflict, the North Korean People's Army, NKPA, advanced rapidly, overwhelming South Korean and United Nations (UN) forces. By the summer of 1950, the situation looked bleak for the UN. North Korean troops had captured most of the Korean peninsula, pushing the beleaguered UN forces into a small pocket of territory known as the Pusan Perimeter in the southeast. It was in this dire situation that General Douglas MacArthur devised a bold plan to reverse the tide. The decision to land at Inchon, MacArthur's bold gamble. The choice of Inchon as the site for a major counteroffensive was one of the most audacious and controversial decisions in military history. General MacArthur, the supreme commander of UN forces, believed that a well-timed amphibious assault behind enemy lines could break the deadlock and cripple the North Korean offensive. Inchon, a port city located on Korea's west coast, was a highly risky choice. Its geography was notoriously difficult for amphibious operations, with extremely high tides, narrow channels, and steep mudflats making the landing perilous. Many of MacArthur's advisors, including members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, argued against the plan, citing these formidable challenges. However, MacArthur was convinced that the element of surprise would outweigh the risks. He famously stated, "The very arguments you have made as to the impracticabilities involved will tend to ensure for me the element of surprise." Planning and logistics of Operation Chromite. The operation, codenamed Chromite, was a logistical nightmare. Planning had to account for the tidal conditions, which allowed only a brief window for landing each day. Additionally, the port was heavily fortified by North Korean forces, making an amphibious landing even more dangerous. The operation required meticulous coordination between naval, air, and ground forces. Naval bombardments would soften enemy defenses, while air superiority would be crucial in neutralizing North Korean artillery and communication lines. The landing would be carried out in multiple phases, with the first wave of U.S. Marines seizing the initial beachhead, followed by reinforcements to secure Inchon and push towards Seoul. Despite the risks, the detailed planning and logistical precision laid the groundwork for what would become a landmark operation in military history. The amphibious landing, execution, and key phases. On the morning of September 15th, the U.S. Marines began their assault. Naval gunfire from U.S. warships, including the battleship USS Missouri, pounded North Korean positions, while carrier-based aircraft provided air support. The first phase of the landing took place at Wolmi-do, a small island guarding Inchon's harbor. This initial assault was critical, as the island's defenses needed to be neutralized to allow the larger amphibious force to land at Inchon itself. The Marines swiftly overwhelmed the defenders on Wolmi-do, paving the way for the second phase, the main landing at Inchon. As the Marines stormed the beaches, they faced intense resistance from well-entrenched North Korean forces. However, superior firepower, air support, and the element of surprise allowed the U.S. troops to secure the beachhead. By the end of the day, Inchon was in American hands, and the operation was deemed a resounding success. Impact of the Inchon landing on the Korean War. The success of the Inchon landing had an immediate and profound impact on the Korean War. It effectively outflanked the North Korean army, which had been concentrating its forces around the Pusan perimeter. With their supply lines cut and their forces now facing an attack from the rear, the North Korean army was forced into a rapid retreat. Within weeks, UN forces had recaptured the South Korean capital of Seoul, and the momentum of the war had dramatically shifted. The Inchon landing not only saved South Korea from near-certain defeat, but also allowed UN forces to go on the offensive, pushing North Korean troops back across the 38th parallel. Leadership and tactical genius. General MacArthur's role. The success of the Inchon landing is often attributed to the leadership and strategic vision of General MacArthur. His decision to take a high-risk gamble with the landing at Inchon demonstrated his understanding of the importance of surprise and audacity in military strategy. Throughout the operation, MacArthur's ability to inspire confidence in his subordinates and his willingness to take personal responsibility for the risks involved were key factors in the success of the operation. His role in directing the landing, overseeing the logistics, and ensuring the execution of the complex plan highlighted his tactical genius. However, MacArthur's success at Inchon would also set the stage for future controversies in the war, as his ambition and aggressive strategies would later lead to friction with political leaders back in Washington. Lessons from Inchon: amphibious warfare and modern military strategy. The Inchon landing is often studied as a textbook example of amphibious warfare. It demonstrated the importance of coordination between different branches of the military, naval, air, and ground forces, and the value of strategic surprise. The operation also highlighted the critical role of logistics and planning in overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles, such as challenging geography and enemy fortifications. In the decades since, the lessons of Inchon have influenced military doctrines on amphibious warfare and continue to be relevant in modern military strategy. While the Korean War would drag on for several more years, the Inchon landing remains one of its defining moments, a bold and decisive action that turned the tide in favor of the UN forces. On September 15, 1916, during the First World War, the British Army launched a significant attack during the Battle of the Somme. The broader strategic objective of this battle was to break the deadlock that had gripped the Western Front since late 1914. The trenches stretched from the North Sea to the Swiss frontier, and both sides had endured enormous casualties with little gain. The British and French sought to wear down the German forces and relieve pressure on the French army at Verdun. However, by the autumn of 1916, the results of the Somme offensive were disappointing. the stalemate continued despite fierce fighting and horrendous loss of life. In an effort to gain an advantage and break through the heavily fortified German lines, the British Army looked to new technology. The war had already seen innovations like machine guns, poison gas, and airplanes, but none had broken the trench deadlock. It was in this context that the British introduced a new weapon, the tank. Development of the tank, the Mark I. The idea for a land battleship, or tank, emerged from the need to cross difficult terrain and break through enemy trenches. The British government had been secretly developing the tank since 1915, with the Mark I being the result of this work. This early tank was designed to move over rough ground, crush barbed wire, and provide mobile firepower that could support infantry in breaking through enemy defenses. The Mark I was a crude design by modern standards, slow, prone to breakdowns, and difficult to maneuver, but it was the first vehicle of its kind to enter combat. The tank's development was fraught with challenges. Mechanical reliability was poor, as the machine had to cope with shell-torn battlefields, trenches, and uneven terrain. Nonetheless, it was hoped that the Mark I would provide a decisive advantage in the battlefield, helping to push back entrenched German forces and potentially bring about a breakthrough on the Western Front. The tactical deployment of tanks at Flers-Courcelette. The first use of tanks in combat occurred on September 15, 1916, during the Battle of Flers-Courcelette, part of the ongoing Somme offensive. 49 tanks were allocated for the attack, though only 32 made it to the front lines. The tanks were deployed in small groups to support the infantry advance, aiming to surprise and overwhelm the German defenders. The use of tanks was a shock to the Germans, who had not encountered such a machine before. The British tanks, lumbering and noisy, rolled forward, crushing barbed wire and leading the charge. In some areas, the tanks advanced several miles, contributing to the capture of villages like Flers and Courcelette. However, they were not used in large numbers, and their impact was uneven across the front. Technical challenges and operational effectiveness. Despite the novelty of the tank, their performance on the battlefield was far from perfect. The tanks were slow, with a top speed of about 3.7 miles per hour, and their engines frequently broke down. Of the 32 tanks that reached the battlefield, many were quickly disabled by mechanical failure or enemy fire. They were also difficult to steer and vulnerable to artillery shells. The tanks' limited range and slow speed made them easy targets once their initial shock value had worn off. Their heavy armor was designed to protect them from machine guns, but artillery fire could still destroy them. In addition, the early tanks lacked proper ventilation, and many crews suffered from the heat and fumes inside the vehicle. Impact on military tactics and morale. While the tanks had limited tactical success in their first outing, their psychological impact on both sides was significant. For the British infantry, the tanks offered a glimpse of a new form of warfare, one in which the seemingly impregnable German trenches could be breached. Their presence on the battlefield raised morale, even as their practical effectiveness remained uncertain. For the Germans, the tanks were terrifying. This was a machine they had never seen before, capable of crossing trenches and barbed wire. The shock of encountering these steel behemoths had a demoralizing effect on German troops in some sectors, although the overall German defense remained strong. Aftermath and lessons learned. In the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Flers-Courcelette, the British High Command recognized that the tank was not a battlefield game-changer yet. The tanks had helped capture several key objectives, but they had not delivered the breakthrough that was hoped for. However, the British Army learned valuable lessons from the tank's first use. One major lesson was the need for better coordination between tanks and infantry. The tanks often outpaced the infantry, leaving them vulnerable to counterattacks once the tanks broke down or were destroyed. Another lesson was the need to improve the mechanical reliability and speed of future tank designs. The Mark I had proven the concept, but it was clear that tanks would need significant improvements to fulfill their potential. The evolution of tank warfare post-1916. The initial deployment of tanks at Flers-Courcelette marked the beginning of a new era in military history. Over the next few years, the British continued to refine tank designs, learning from the lessons of 1916. By 1917, the Mark IV tank had been developed, offering improved reliability and firepower. Tanks played a more decisive role in later battles, such as the Battle of Cambrai in 1917, where they were used in larger numbers with greater tactical success. The lessons learned from World War I laid the groundwork for the development of modern armored warfare. By the time of World War II, tanks had become a central element of military strategy, revolutionizing warfare with their mobility, firepower, and ability to operate across diverse terrains. The first tank battle at Flers-Courcelette, despite its limited tactical success, had shown that the future of warfare would belong to machines that could break the deadlock of trench warfare and transform the battlefield. In 213 BCE, during the Second Punic War, the Roman Republic set its sights on the powerful city-state of Syracuse, located on the island of Sicily. This event marked a pivotal moment in the larger conflict between Rome and Carthage, a struggle for dominance that would reshape the Mediterranean world. Historical context of the Second Punic War. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, was the second of three major conflicts between Rome and Carthage, both emerging superpowers of the ancient world. At its core, the war was a contest for control over territories in the Western Mediterranean, particularly the lucrative and strategically vital island of Sicily. Syracuse, a prominent Greek city-state, was deeply entrenched in the geopolitics of the region. While it initially maintained neutrality, it eventually aligned itself with Carthage during the war, making it a critical target for Roman expansion. Syracuse, a Greek city-state's role in the war. Syracuse, one of the wealthiest and most influential city-states in the Mediterranean, had a long tradition of Greek governance, culture, and military prowess. During the Second Punic War, the city found itself in a precarious position. Under the leadership of King Hieronymus, Syracuse broke its previous alliance with Rome and sided with Carthage. This decision was crucial for Carthage, as it gave them a powerful ally in the region and threatened Roman control over Sicily. Syracuse's wealth, resources, and fortified position made it a significant player in the broader conflict. Roman strategy and the importance of Sicily. For Rome, Sicily was a key strategic asset. Controlling the island not only secured a foothold in the Mediterranean but also disrupted Carthaginian supply lines and military operations. The conquest of Syracuse was crucial to Rome's objective of dominating the region. By capturing the city, the Romans could solidify their presence in Sicily and weaken Carthage's influence. Rome's broader military strategy during the Second Punic War involved isolating Carthaginian allies and securing key territories, and Syracuse was one of the most important pieces in that puzzle. The role of Archimedes in Syracuse's defense. One of the most fascinating aspects of the siege was the involvement of Archimedes, the renowned mathematician and engineer. Although better known for his contributions to geometry and physics, Archimedes played a crucial role in defending Syracuse from the Roman forces. His inventions, which included advanced war machines, catapults, and even the legendary Archimedes' claw, helped repel Roman attacks and delay the city's fall. These devices, designed to lift and capsize enemy ships, showcased his genius and added an extraordinary technological element to the defense of Syracuse. The siege, phases and key battles. The siege of Syracuse was a prolonged and complex affair that lasted for nearly 2 years, from 213 to 212 BCE. The Roman forces, led by the experienced General Marcus Claudius Marcellus, launched multiple assaults on the city, but the initial phases of the siege were largely unsuccessful due to Archimedes' defensive innovations. Despite their numerical superiority, the Romans struggled to breach the city's formidable defenses. However, after several failed attempts, the tide began to turn. A key turning point came when the Romans exploited a lapse in the city's nighttime security, allowing them to infiltrate Syracuse and overwhelm its defenders. Technological and tactical innovations. Both sides employed a range of technological and tactical innovations during the siege. Archimedes' war machines were a marvel of ancient engineering, using principles of leverage and mechanics to create devastating effects on the battlefield. His giant catapults could hurl stones and projectiles at great distances, while the claw could pluck enemy ships from the sea and smash them against the rocks. On the Roman side, persistence and adaptation were key. The Romans gradually modified their siege tactics, building stronger siege towers and ramps to overcome Syracuse's defenses. They also employed psychological warfare, wearing down the morale of the city's inhabitants over the long duration of the siege. The fall of Syracuse, a turning point in the Second Punic War. The eventual fall of Syracuse in 212 BCE was a significant moment in the Second Punic War. With the city's defeat, Rome secured its dominance over Sicily, effectively cutting off Carthage's ability to use the island as a base of operations. The capture of Syracuse shifted the balance of power in the Mediterranean and was a severe blow to Carthage's strategic interests. For Rome, it represented a major victory that not only enhanced their territorial control but also demonstrated their ability to conquer even the most formidable of city-states. Aftermath and legacy of the siege. The aftermath of the siege was marked by the incorporation of Syracuse into the Roman Republic. The city's fall also resulted in significant cultural and material spoils for Rome, as Syracuse was a wealthy and prosperous city. However, the loss was devastating for Syracuse, which saw its independence disappear and its fortunes decline under Roman rule. The siege marked the end of Syracuse as a major power in the Mediterranean, and the city became another important outpost in Rome's expanding empire. Cultural and historical impact. The siege of Syracuse is remembered not only for its military significance but also for the contributions of Archimedes and the technological innovations employed during the conflict. It has been immortalized in various historical writings, serving as an example of how science and warfare can intersect. Archimedes himself became a legendary figure, celebrated for his intellect and the dramatic role he played in defending his city. The story of the siege is a testament to the enduring impact of both Roman military prowess and Greek ingenuity in the annals of classical history.